There we go. Thank you. So welcome everybody. My name is Matt Peters. I'm a partner at McCarthy Tatro, and I'm the national innovation leader. And excited to do this session, the data-driven insights in the legal industry, and we're really planning to sort of have a informal chat about this, so hoping that we can sort of get many of you to kind of participate with questions and dive in. But let me introduce the geniuses here. I'm just here to facilitate, so I just to be clear, I'm not in the category of geniuses, but we have and I think we should be sort of pinned at the top of the screen. I'm just going to go in order that I see, at least. So Mark is the first I have to see on the screen. So really excited, Mark. You're not only a genius, but I'll call you a data genius, and with some great credentials. It leads the financial performance and data science practice at LawVision, and both from a past perspective, legal practitioner, industry economist, a law firm data strategist. You mentioned also spent some time at IBM, and also I think really interestingly, one of the things from past, Mark, that I think will give you some great context is that you launched and led the peer monitor program at Thomson Reuters and the peer monitor index. So just really think about macro legal data. So excited to have Mark here. Thank you, Mark, for taking the time. And then next I have on at least my screen, Katherine's up next. So Katherine co-chairs the emerging technology team at Baker Hostetler, and leads the firm's legal technology consulting and R&D team, incubator, which I thought was like, you should get an award for the best title there as well, Katherine. I think Katherine's list of recognitions is actually quite long, including like honoree at Fast Case 50, ILTA's Thought Leader of the Year. And this one I loved, Katherine, from Relativity, the first annual AI Visionaries in 2022. So really excited. Your perspective is going to be absolutely fantastic in this conversation. And Judith McKay. So Judith and I have the privilege of working together with Judith, and Judith is the Chief Client and Innovation Officer at McCarthy's, and I could spend a long time sort of saying all sorts of things. Well, Judith is not really worried actually, where is he going to go with this? But but actually, just I think your background, Judith, from like a chemical engineer, so you have that sort of the engineering sort of side, IP lawyer by training, but then you also come from the client side, which I think is so important. On the Judith was, before we fortunate to have her come to McCarthy's, was the Vice President General Counsel at DuPont Pioneer. And she also sort of played a role as Chief Admin Officer there for a period of time. So just really brings that client perspective. And then also amongst like a very long list of awards as well. But one I love is the 100 Most Powerful Women Award in Canada. That's one I just picked out, Judith, just for fun. And so anyways, I'm really excited to do it. What Judith will be able to bring the lens from the client perspective and data, and then also just being from the law firm side as well. So that's the panel, and so from a process perspective, we're just going to dive in with a whole bunch of questions in the conversation, and feel free to kind of tap any questions into the chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep tabs on that, and then plan is at the end, if I'll collect up questions as well if I haven't sort of picked some up. And so that's the plan for today. So why don't we start, Katherine, with you with just kind of framing this conversation and talking a bit about sort of when you think about sort of like the North Star for sort of leveraging data in the legal industry. I'd love just your perspective of sort of what you think that should be, and just your perspective that you bring to that.
Well, I appreciate that. And thanks for the intro. Great to see everyone. Excited to talk today about data strategy. And I think part of the North Star has to be understanding what is the most critical pressing challenges that you have in your organization. Because I think all of the things that we can do with data can line up with that. We can do 1,000,001 things, but if we aren't thinking about what's most critical, and I mean that in a very sincere, there's going to be a lot of business objectives that we have at Gartner. use three things that we talk about all the time: utility, enablers, and drivers. And I think that utility is kind of using data all the time. Enablers, I'm going to enable a strategy, and drivers, I'm going to drive new business. And across your organization, you're going to have a variety of those. So I think it's really about understanding, if you're just starting out, what's the most pressing challenges that you have, and ensuring that your data initiatives align with that. For us at Baker Hostetler, it was really apparent for us that we had to do a lot to understand what data we even had, then line it with our strategy or overall business imperatives, not just our technical imperatives. But then I think it came down to us that in the end, the North Star is really about unlocking the value for clients. Where are we going to see that as a very tactical level? And that in part means that we're going to have to change behavior. We're going to have to change how we collect information, how we process it, how we deliver it, how those that receive it deliver it. So I think at the highest star, the North Star for me is much more about alignment of critical challenges and making sure that your data initiatives align with it. But I think in part of that is understanding, acknowledging that we are changing behavior this entire time. And that's a hard part. Conceptually, it's hard. Achieving on a technical level is hard. And with people that are really focused on time and material, anytime that I go away from them to ask them for data, that is going to be even harder. So I just think changing behavior is a key component to it. I'll end by, and I hope everybody else will participate on this question too, because I think it's a great one. I really think that at Baker, we focused on data as an asset, and, you know, on our physical hard drives and monitors, those are assets that we inventory. Very rarely before 2017, when we started our data strategy, did we inventory data, who owns it, what it is. But I think changing the part of that behavior is really acknowledging that data is an asset, a critical asset that needs alignment with your business imperatives.
That's awesome. Well, and Mark, why don't you jump into that, sort of both on, you know, the same topic of kind of, you know, what are the right projects to pick in the great sea of data, and you know, and maybe just even extend that out. Like, you know, when you look at these projects, what do you think people should be looking for from a success criteria perspective, and you know, so how you pick on projects, just like, you know, Katherine sort of speaking to, and looking for what success should look like.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thanks to all of you for welcoming me to the session. And by the way, I rarely am described as a genius, and if you need any evidence for that, I've got a wife, 2 children, and 2 dogs that would be glad to disagree with you on that one. You know, I think where I come from on data, and I just, you know, again, I apologize because I'm going to sound like a cheerleader, but I just really love the potency of data, and I love, for example, the way Katherine described data as an asset. And for those of you who are good readers about this kind of stuff, and I presume with this audience, everybody is, if you haven't read Tomas, I think it's Tomas Tunga's Winning with Data, which is a very simplistic kind of a book, but it's very deep and rich in terms of the ideas around data. It's not new, it's probably 5 years old, but it will actually give you a nice strategic orientation around data. But as Matthew mentioned, I started my career many years ago with IBM, which, if you really think about IBM, especially back in its heyday, was very much into data architecture and sending out really technological architecture, which is really critically important. And in many respects, it's only gotten increasingly more important. But over those years, I've gotten older, and I have a much greater sense of, hey, what can we do today with data? And notwithstanding the fact that I want to build on great architecture, a lot of the way I think of what I do with data is in a very analogous way that you think about mathematics and applied mathematics, which is, I want to solve problems with data today. And even if projects might take 3 months or a year, I want to make sure that we can actually look at really important criteria like data action rates. And are we actually effectuating change within the law firms that I work with? I work dominantly with law firms on topics related to performance, related to pricing, and related to profitability, and those kinds of idea strategy overall. So choosing the project has less to me to do about data in most of my endeavors, and has more to do with, hey, do you need to price better? Or do you need to manage your matters more effectively? And how do you identify those problems and measure their potential impact? And whether it's ROI on the asset of your data, or one of the most interesting metrics that I think about a lot are things like data action rates, which is, all right, so you build a beautiful dashboard where you spend all this time building a data lake or a data mart, but what is your actual beneficial use of that data? And then, and anybody that I've spent any bit of time on this topic has heard me say what I'm going to say next a lot, which is the last thing we need is another pretty dashboard. What we really need is change behavior. And by the way, I love pretty dashboards. So in spite of the fact that I'm very passionate and intrigued with the next great visualization, and I'm part of it in some cases, really, it's how do you really effectuate the kind of change that you're looking at? And last point before I kind of yield the stage to the next panelist would be to say, well, what problems are most important to your firm, or to say it a different way, what opportunities are most available to your firm, and how can you, in a very flexible fashion, respond to that? So that's how I get into the aspect of data.
Yeah, well, thank you. And actually, I want to take that and actually you drilling down on that idea of solving problems and changing behaviors. Like Judith, just thinking about sort of different challenges inside sort of organizations. Like I'm going to pick D&I, for example, like inclusion and diversity. Any thoughts on sort of data in the context of solving like that challenge? Just using that as a drill down.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I'm thrilled to be here. And I couldn't agree more with Katherine and Mark on the point of, really honing in on your priorities and unlocking values for clients and changing behavior. And data used right absolutely can bring all of that value. And certainly an area, diversity and inclusion, all of our firms are really working hard to bring more equity and inclusion within our firms, and our clients are demanding it. And data can be so powerful as a change agent around what we need to get there. And increasingly clients are asking for it, not just firm-wide diversity data, but saying, who's on my teams and how do we support diversity and inclusion in the work that we're doing together. And this is where data can be really, really valuable. So, what we've done is collect data, at the client and matter level, and look at, who are the top billers, what percentage, by gender, by other diversity statistics, and use that to have conversations with the relationship partners and enable them to have the conversations with our clients to say, hopefully this rarely happens, but, give an extreme example, why do we have 100% men on all the files for this client when, we know diversity is important to them and it's important to us. And then, bringing a list of women partners or partners with other diverse backgrounds and having a conversation to say, we're not talking about displacing partners, we're talking about growing the pie and deepening the relationship with the client. What associates could we bring onto this file? What other areas could we pitch that this woman partner could do? So using the data to drive the conversation and affect change. And it takes all the blame out of it, because you're not saying you're a bad person. We're just saying, this is what the data says. Let's talk about how to fix it. And then, that data can also flow into our work allocation processes as well to, remove that potential for unconscious bias by, really pulling up the stats, by client and by practice area and by industry to truly drive change.
Really love that theme of I think in a lot of areas, and data may be the latest one where, it's kind of like, is the new shiny object. Everybody wanted that, as you said, Mark, like everyone wanted a dashboard, everyone wanted this, but the actual sort of, I think, sometimes when, you know, the industry lost sight of the why. And as you said, Judith, like drilling down and sort of really affecting, how are we affecting change with these tools and these insights, as opposed to just sort of a nice, you know, that beautiful dashboard for the sake of having a dashboard. Katherine, jump back to you just on that theme of kind of like, you know, any other sort of like, you know, really sort of high value proposition data initiatives that you've seen or you've been involved in or heard about?
Well, yes, and I would say it would be under the general category of risk models. I think that it can apply to EI&D initiatives. It can apply to litigation. Most squarely, I've seen it in litigation thus far. And I think we've spent years working on how do we build the foundation of data so that we can now model it and apply risk. But I think that is the next big step, at least for us. And I think I see the industry in this mammoth, what I call data race. Everybody's on the starting line somewhere, but we all are on different courses. So it's often hard to collaborate with others because we're just at different points. But in saying that, I think for those that have spent years building a basis for how to collect data, how to process it, transform it, and then at the end, visualize it, which I think is literally the last piece. And just want to say there's a lot of work that goes in before that. Once you are at that stage, I think there's now this next level that we want to iterate on, and that's in risk models. And the risk models really identify liability exposure, reputational risk, regulatory risk, business impact, and for like a litigation, likelihood of becoming a claim. Those are all areas that I think really ripe right now, because you have the data. Now we can start to structure it so that we can say this plus this equals this type of risk, right? And so now we can start to say, okay, here's the red, yellow, green. This is where we want to use that information to effectuate change, especially when it comes to liability exposure. And remember, under the umbrella, I've been focused very, very heavily on litigation. So that's where a lot of my comments come from. But I think equally, it could apply to equity, inclusion, and diversity, right? You have an element of risk, formulas that can be applied on the amount of people working on certain projects or not working on certain projects. Bias found in performance review. That's a shout out to Ballard Spahr. I don't know if you've heard what they've been doing, but they've been using machine learning to leverage bias in performance reviews. It's a fantastic presentation that they gave, and really hats off to them, because I think those are, again, data projects that are going to get you to the table. They're going to encourage action, encourage change.
Well, and you mentioned, Katherine, well, hold on this thread for a little bit, like like just, you spend a lot of time at first building the foundation, right? And maybe like Mark, jump to you on that theme around, like I'm sure, Katherine, if we pull on that a little bit, it wasn't sort of you woke up one day and then it magically happened, and then all of a sudden you had, you know, these wonderful things. I want to talk about sort of the building up and the building of the foundation, and jump in, Katherine, start with you, Mark, like around like bad data, talking about bottlenecks, like just like the actual kind of building that foundation, what you've seen in different law firms, what's worked, what hasn't. Because imagine this is a bit overwhelming for people, right? Like it's kind of like, it's almost like, how do we even start, and what are going to be our big roadblocks? Do you want to jump in on that, Mark?
Yeah, sure. It's actually again, it's because I think of my various travels. And again, I spent quite some time in the early part of my career before I entered into legal in the software industry, and so I spent a spell, or at least got exposed to the Software Engineering Institute over at Carnegie Mellon University, where there was a strong emphasis on things like project life cycles and software methodology, software engineering methodologies in particular in that context. That again, over the course of time, have really evolved and been modernized with regard to things like agile methods and so forth. All of those words, depending on how deep you are into the technology, can sound pretty nerdy, right? Pretty technical, and frankly, they probably are. I think while those, again, you're going to see a theme in some of my comments, which while those things are critically important, I think there's an opportunity today that's emerged probably in the last 5 to 10 years would be my guess, but I don't know exactly where the boundaries lie, where you're actually starting to see people that aren't experts out of Carnegie Mellon able to manipulate data based on the evolution and the advancements in technology. Where you might simply have a data analyst who doesn't have a software orientation, but is really good at connecting the dots to address problems, much of which we've already been discussing, whether it's a diversity problem, whether it's, hey, we're not connecting with our client well enough. Why is that? We're not understanding their business well enough. How do we build streams to do so, and so forth? So I guess what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is it's important to have an approach. And whether it's a full-bodied engineering methodology or whether it's more of a business analytical approach that is iterative and cumulative, I think that style, that approach is really important. And on top of that, the modern approaches from a business analytical perspective invite what I will call trial and error and a business-oriented approach. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if you think about, if any of you have been involved in any type of software projects or what have you through the years, you know how structured they are and how there's a certain amount of, well, we need to develop a set of specs or design elements and then go back and throw it over the wall and kind of work on it. Whereas many of the projects that I've been involved in recent years have been much more about getting business people with some technical folks involved, but a certain blend of those types of resources who come together, and they're thinking more along the lines of the business problems. I have seen that completely transform a couple of dimensions of the project. One is it allows you to be less concerned about the underlying technical elements, notwithstanding the fact they're really important, but it allows you to kind of iterate in a way from a business dimension that you previously really couldn't do. I think we're going to see more of that, and whether you call it low code or no code environments, or whether you call it, different types of things related to technology. I actually saw an article over the weekend in some data science magazine I was reading that mentioned that the projection for the use of using tools like Python environments over Excel spreadsheets is going to be growing at an exponential rate over the next 10 years. And that's because these tools are more powerful, more potent, and they give you the ability to be much more agile in the approach.
Yeah, love that, Mark. And back on you, Katherine, just same question around sort of this building foundations, where you found some of the roadblocks, the challenges, and how you dealt with sort of data aggregation. So some of those issues that built up to sort of some of the things that you ultimately observed being able to pull off.
Well, I will try to keep it brief because I think we could spend a whole day on this topic alone. But let me just say this, back in 2017, we decided to do a data flow analysis over 15 systems of record. It was probably one of the best moves we've ever made because we knew what data was in each system, the reliability of that data or data quality or lack thereof, data ownership. We were able to spot specific issues through that process and helped us understand that we had multiple pain points, massive amount of manual data entry and extracts, lack of ownership. We had relationships one-to-many causing some downstream issues in reporting. Reporting capabilities were weak. All of that was helpful for us so that we could formulate our business intelligence strategy, is what we dubbed it many, many years ago. And then from there, we decided that we would have a vision that we were going to share with everyone. And that's really to increase operational and analytical capabilities. We wanted to become a digital business first through an integrated data platform, leveraging two things, internal data and external data. So that kind of put the stake in the sand, help us think about how we were going to leverage data, kind of marketing as a critical data asset. And from there, we decided down a path of the most important business initiative, substantive business initiative that was facing us at the time, and that was litigation. And so we thought we would start with one of our 6 core practice teams, litigation, and we would figure out how to create a very, consider a massive Azure data pipeline. And so we worked with an external consultant to help upskill our tech team, both our development as well as our business analysts, to be able to help ingest external data, transform it, and then be able to present it through various data models. That to me is what I refer to as kind of building the foundation, because now we have the skills and the capabilities. We still have a lot of problems along the way. And that is corporate and corporate and people data, trying to transform them so that we can see a unified result list and be able to visualize that in a better way. But we have learned a tremendous amount along this path, and being able to understand what it would take from a vendor to support our data pipeline. And we have some great ones. Unicorn is one of them. And those that maybe don't work out for us and what that looks like, or maybe it's just not the right time. But I think from there, what I also would say is part of this strategy that is difficult is the turn to make this embedded into the practice groups, to make sure it's being leveraged, and kind of, Mark, to your point, not another pretty dashboard, right? And I think that really stems from, okay, this is what the data is telling us, great. Or it's maybe a count, if you will, great. Now what? And now it's about how do we make it actionable? And that's where I think we're really maturing into the space of the risk models to help draw business insights into those risk models, so that there's a directional piece to it, or information that's going to help part of the business problem. And I think that's really where we're focused on to increase and unlock the value.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Judith, I want to sort of change the lens on this conversation a bit, and sort of, from the perspective of clients and that voice of the clients, like if you're speaking to law firms and kind of saying, like, whether it be data in the CRM systems, or informing sort of like content strategy, what would your perspective be on sort of what law firms should be thinking about the context of sort of that lens in the context of clients, and sort of what they should be serving, and what have you seen that sort of you think really works well?
A really small question. Thanks for that, Matt.
I like to throw the big ones out, so I was like,
so putting my client hat on, I'd say there's a myriad of things I could say, but I'll focus on a couple of areas. And one is there's nothing more frustrating as a client than when your law firm seems to be uncoordinated around your work and your issues, and you don't have kind of a baseline knowledge about your business and your preferences, and who you've been connecting with and working with at the client, or with the firm. And so having using data to coordinate efforts and keep each other informed, I think, is a very high priority for clients. And then the second piece to that is proactivity. And I always appreciated it when a law firm called me to say, there's this legislation coming, or there's this lawsuit outcome that might impact your business. Have you thought about it? And even if I had thought about it, I appreciated that they were thinking about it. And even if I thought about it, they had lots of other ideas that could contribute. And I talk to clients all the time. And we recently, surveyed them on client service, and they all unanimously said, you can't have too much proactivity. We really want you to be proactive and approach us and get ahead of our issues and inform us about what we should be concerned about. And I think that is more true today than ever, with just the complexity and disruption in the world all around us. So, with those two themes, there's a couple of areas where we really focused in, and I love the point that both Katherine and Mark made about, understanding this as a business problem, and then, choosing which business problems are the highest priority. So on kind of the coordination and, level setting on knowledge issue, we really doubled down years ago on our CRM system. And Matt and I worked very closely on that. So Matt, feel free to, I know you're the moderator, but jumping in with any thoughts you have around that. But we started from the premise of, how does a CRM system add value to clients, and how could it add greater value to clients, so that we can deepen our relationships with clients and grow that relationship in a coordinated and informed way that adds value. And so we decided, our CRM would be far more than just a repository of information, but a change agent, a source of change within the firm. And so one of the things early on we decided is that our CRM would be completely transparent, so that everyone could kind of see what everyone else is doing and what they're working on, etc. And then we said, to get people to use it, we need to drive a lot of data capture and also activity on the site, so that people get familiar with the site and they're in there. So, so in terms of activity, all of our partner plans, our industry plans, and our client plans are all inputted directly into our CRM, and we use Salesforce as our platform. All of our BD expense approval and reporting is there, referral tracking, sponsorships, etc. And then in terms of capturing data, we capture all our Net Promoter Score data by client, and we capture client feedback, interview outcomes. We capture client preferences. We capture people on the move at our clients. We capture what our clients are reading, what events they're attending, what pitches and proposals we've done them, did we win or lose and why, any other BD activities, and referral data. So there's a lot of data, and to the point made earlier, you can have all kinds of data, and that really doesn't serve the business purpose. It's how you use it and analyze it. And so we really focused on how do you aggregate that data into reports to achieve insights. And some interesting and even unexpected things happened. We certainly thought the client teams would be much more coordinated with the data, which absolutely has been the case. But it also elevated the capability of our clients and markets team. And we hire strong, very bright people with great business backgrounds or legal backgrounds or both. But even so often in a client planning meeting, their role would be, well, what do you guys want to do, and capture it and then project manage it. But with this data, they're able to pull reports and be able to go into those meetings with insights to say, did you know that your clients are attending all kinds of events on ESG and they've been reading up on it? And I see we haven't pitched them on that and nobody has it as a target yet. How about we pull together a group to go chase after this opportunity? Or there's a new GC, we don't know their preferences yet, and how do we help build their profile? They haven't received any awards recently, maybe that will give a boost to their career. So, so they're able, with all this data, to go in and really be thought leaders and true partners with our partners to help deepen the relationship and grow our base with that client. So we also take that data now and we work with our partners to say, if you were in a taxi on the way to the client and you just didn't have time before you left to kind of inform yourself, what would you need to know? So and almost all that data was already in our system. So we just pulled all of that into a report that they can get at a click of a button. So on the cab on the way to the client, they can read all this stuff and be highly informed by the time they arrive. So we've also taken that data to say, okay, let's pull together news reports for clients. So we have a timely topics report that pulls together all the trending topics that we found through the data in our CRM, as well as some information we get from our research team, as well as from our partners. So that's actually helped. So it's actually helped drive our content strategy too, to make it much more relevant and timely for our clients. So, and then we do win-loss data, so we know as a firm where we sit on pitches and proposals and what trends we're seeing from the win or loss reasons. And we track our overall net promoter score to see how we're doing as a firm in terms of client satisfaction. So I think I'm missing a whole bunch of things, but it really has become over the years an absolutely amazing tool.
I think what's important is for people to hear those tangible results around sort of, data pulled together and change. And yet, and actually this plays on question that Chris asked, so I'll ask this now, Katherine and Mark as well, like, when you sort of, just like Judith described, like, like, can you think of examples, like in Mark, in your case, as you work with, organizations, and Katherine inside your organization, where how surfacing reporting data has really catalyzed that material positive change, just like the example that Judith described. I think it's great to hear examples like that. And so maybe I'll start with you, Mark, and I'll go across the screen to you, Katherine.
Yeah, I'll be brief, but I'm going to start out with sort of an example of, have you ever noticed, I'm going to start with the premise that more is not better. So more data is not better. And one of the dangers in today's world is we have access to a lot more data, and there's a temptation to simply say, hey, let's gather all that data and then smash it out onto the whatever palette that you're going to present it to your user. One of the examples I use, and many of you may not even agree with what I'm going to say, but I have noticed that if I'm using an application and I use it, let's say on the web, through a web browser versus on an iPad versus an iPhone. Now, the one I do a lot of financial reading because a lot of my work relates to financial performance. But one good example is the Wall Street Journal. If I read the Wall Street Journal on a Chrome browser versus on my iPhone or on an iPad, I have a completely different experience. And if you really think about that, the reason I'm having, and by the way, the better experience more often than not is on the iPhone, not because I prefer the iPhone, but because the application or the way they present the data is much more constrained with small space. You don't have as much opportunity to just blast data at people, and consequently it puts more effort on the designer to think about what's most important and how to tell that story in a better way, right? So I think of that in a lot of cases. So a lot of my work, and Katherine mentioned risk management, but a lot of my work relates to financial risk management. So if you wanted to improve the performance financially of your partners, one thing you could do is you could send them a big giant spreadsheet with all of their performance statistics. Well, here's how you're doing with collections. Here's how you're doing with WIP. Here's how you're doing with this. Here's how you're doing with that. So one of the most interesting applications that I have developed and I incorporate into other facets of it is a billing partner FICO score. So we boil a lot of all those different dimensions down into a single number. Actually, our first application of that was actually not meant to present to the billing partners for purposes of improvement, but it actually went into a risk model by which we calculated the risk of a matter or the risk of a client portfolio, so to speak. But it became so compelling that we actually wound up, in some instances, sharing it with the billing partners for purposes of improving their behavior. And by putting that in a front burner and by articulating it in a way that was very narrowly tailored, and then ultimately joining that with what I would call early warnings and guidance systems, we are actually able to make meaningful progress on that type of performance. So anyway.
Love it. Katherine.
Well, I have a couple of examples, and one that I thought was going to be probably second. I'm going to move to number one. And it's because it was such an interesting evolution of us capturing litigation data. So remember, mine two are probably going to be most focused in litigation because that's where we have the most experiences in the data pipeline. So data pipeline is ingesting vast amounts of cases. And what we do with them, right, is up to us. So one of the things that we decided to do was work with the client so that they could see at the highest level possible all the forest from the trees, every litigation piece of information we knew about them. And one of the things that happened, I always say that data tells a story. And so I agree with Mark, just vast amounts of data doesn't help us. But if you understand what the data is trying to tell you, there's always a story behind it or one that's going to be meaningful for you. And that's the hard part, is figuring out what it is. But in this particular instance, we worked with this client, and what had happened is they had just made a major acquisition. So we thought it would be interesting to tell the story of what your litigation looked like prior to this acquisition and post-acquisition. And what they had seen was about 125% increase in litigation claims and in a certain area. And so I think that that was meaningful for us because while this was a litigation client of ours, our M&A practice, right, really needs to be able to leverage this information and be able to say, could we look at that and help guide you? Is this a good acquisition for you? There's going to be financial risk, there's going to be litigation risk, there's going to be all of these things. And so I think it was just one little slicer in Power BI that helped us pull it apart, show the trend, apply the trend, and see what it looked like to be able to have this meaningful conversation. So to me, it seems small at the time, but I think it was important to us just to know how data tells that story and then how that's going to dovetail to what is most important to the client at that time. I think the internal build that we did that probably leveraged and it created positive change is what we call our docket dashboards. So it was how we could take the data from the data lake, visualize it like HTML, so it's looking like it is data from Pacer. You can see the docket history in reverse chronological order, not super fancy, but what you could do is you could search all of the underlying documents that were filed. So in a class action, this is really meaningful because there might be pieces of information that you need from the origination or in the first part of the litigation versus if you're, towards the tail end that you might need to find. And so that was super meaningful. That allowed us to use natural language processing so that we could find all of the information throughout all the preceding filings. So those are a couple of ways. It's not report necessarily. One was a visualization, and the other is kind of a rendering and applying a search function. But because we structured the data in that way, it gave us advanced capabilities to help specific problems. I hope that's helpful.
No, that's great. And just sort of going, sort of back to kind of how these things happen, because that's what I really want, folks to kind of take away. If they're staring at this great wall in front of them of things that they want to accomplish, so they've listened, they've thought, okay, so here's how I'm going to prioritize some of these projects. Like, what should the staffing look like? This, I want to get really tangible. Do we need 84 PhDs, white coats, and never walking the halls? Mark, your perspective on sort of where does it make sense to collaborate with outside help, and how should we staff and sort of just tangibly make this go work in a call it like a 3-year roadmap from a staffing perspective. Love anybody's sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, if you want me to start, I'll start. I mean, there's a lot of ways into that question, and I think it's a part of the way I try to at least begin an answer. I don't know if it's the answer is use common sense, and the other end of the question it comes up is, do we need a data scientist in my firm? And I suppose the answer to that is it depends to me on whether you're building very advanced kinds of models and so forth. So I think, in fact, it'd be interesting to take a survey. I took a survey on this a few years ago, and very few firms had full-blown data scientists on their staff. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing at this point. I do support that idea, but I guess I start with this idea of, I'm not sure you need it at the outset, depending on the application, but you certainly need people who are data savvy. You certainly need people who understand the business issues. And by the way, I often will say, if you have to make a choice, get somebody who understands the business issues, and then supplement that with the data issues. And that could be somewhat of a controversial position, but I do believe that. And again, you can sort of tell from my earlier comments that I've evolved over the course of time, possibly because I've developed at least a base layer of understanding the underlying technology to be really focused on problem solving, because I really love and am rewarded to see problems solved. So in terms of roles, you need somebody who's data agile, somebody who can appreciate how to manipulate data, at least in the basic form. You need somebody that can communicate, and we've spent an awful lot of time today already telling about the criticality of storytelling with data, which I think is so critically important, because you could spend all this time building all these really exotic data flows and work streams and so forth, but if you're not really getting the change in your organizations, or you're not connecting with your clients, if you're developing a client system, then essentially you're not achieving what you set out to. And to me, that's the ultimate criteria along the way. So that's a starter kit, and I'll let Judith and Katherine enhance my answer or correct it.
That's great.
Judith, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Mark, that I think that it's a collaboration of, you need a variety of different skill sets at the table, and it does need to start with the business strategy and making sure that you understand the strategy and the objectives, and but having data scientists and other experts at the table early can give you the art of possibility, because usually the business strategists don't necessarily, because they're not data experts, might not know what data is available and what insights you could gain from it and how we could leverage that. So I think having a combination of lawyers, business leaders, data analysts, and technologists, I think is a powerful combination, all working against the same business problems.
That's great. Katherine.
I definitely agree with Mark and Judith. I will say, remember when I made the comment about everybody's at a different starting line or in this data race, different course? I think that depending on which course you're on, you need to think about your team differently. When we started in 2017, we did hire an external consultant, one that works for major corporations that have done this day in and day out and could help us build an Azure data pipeline and had those skill sets and credentials. We wanted to upskill our technology team, which included our 5 developers on staff, our Azure cloud team, as well as our data stewards. And we don't technically have data stewards, so I'm going to call them kind of business analysts in a sense, those that sit in a variety of departments, but that understand the business really, really well, so that we can help kind of with those stories. Like I said, connecting the dots on the M&A as recent acquisition. Somebody said, hey, let's take a look at that. That might tell us something. And if somebody wasn't substantively ingrained in that practice area, that we probably wouldn't have seen that. So I think that goes to the variety of skill sets. I would firmly agree with that. I think it depends on what course you're on to know where you're going to have to leverage up. The one thing I will say, we have what we call a citizen data scientist. So somebody that has the capabilities that's in there. We're using Azure Machine Learning Library. We've done several algorithms, maybe up to 10 so far in different practice areas and different administrative needs. And so while not a full-fledged data scientist, we have a lot of skills in that space, and we know when to leverage up with someone externally when we need it. And we work closely with Microsoft Technology Center as well, so we can constantly upskill. So I think that's an important, for me, I think we could have a long conversation on, do you really need a data scientist on staff? I couldn't afford one because I think I would rather double down in business experts, because they're the ones that are going to help us connect the dots. And certainly I think you can find consultants to help in that space. So I hope that's helpful.
No, that's great. And actually, it's a good lead. There's a couple questions that have come in, and I'm going to do them in reverse order, because, building on your last comment, Katherine, Michael, great question. Essentially, the question is, how can you use data to help firm leaders understand what levers they need to and can in fact pull, what effective actions can they take, that can actually guide behavior of the people that they're managing. And so I think the question at its core is, data may tell them what needs to be done, but are we seeing data being used to tell them how they need to sort of affect change? So Mark, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, no, I'll be brief and try not to be too cute about it, but and this is the one that sort of sits right into this realm. And you see a lot of different models, whether it's a McKinsey model or a Gartner model, what have you, about how to think about data. And the way I kind of use a dumb guy's approach to thinking about it is, are you dealing with data from the past? So the ghost in the holiday season that we're entering into, the ghost of Christmas past, present, or future. And if the ghost of Christmas future can tell you, hey, by the way, if you do this, this is going to happen, and here's your next best action you should take in order to do that. To me, I think that is, at least in current state of the art, most ideal. But that's really challenging. I have actually deployed systems not quite there, but I pushed into that neighborhood. But playbooking or prescriptive analytics is what some of the scientists describe it, is something that I have not seen law firms embrace, wholesale at this point. And there's a lot of different contexts for it, right? So again, I work in financial performance for law firms. So what am I often trying to prescribe? Hey, this matter is going off the road financially, which ultimately can lead to client satisfaction issues. But you could also just as well put those types of systems in. And I don't want to speak for Katherine, but we talked about it in our preparation call about this idea of anticipating risk on behalf of your clients. So imagine knowing that they're going to have a risk before they know it and call you about trying to solve it right ahead of the curve. So those ideas, I think, can really set you apart. And if you contextualize it briefly, this industry has a history of operating in lockstep. A lot of law firms take same approaches and they look at what others are doing. And I think that kind of idea is not terrible, and it probably will continue for the foreseeable future. But I think increasingly there's an opportunity for law firms to differentiate using those types of devices. And so even though I think we're still young in that type of dynamic, I think there's a tremendous competitive opportunity for firms to think along those lines. So
I'll just add an ancillary question to that, Mark. I think that the legal industry, and maybe some might sort of argue that this is unfair, but I think we solidly sort of track a decade or two behind the rest of the business world, and so that, which gives us an opportunity, which is to learn from everybody else. Like, can you think of any other industries or areas where they might be doing this better than us that we could learn from?
Well, yeah, two of them, the financial markets in particular, is where I've analogized constantly. That's when we pioneered the peer monitor index. I was trying to look at things like the Dow Jones or the S&P index and so forth, but the insurance markets in particular. So how I have derived a lot of my most recent risk management models. Actually, believe it or not, I wasn't working with the managing partner or the CFO. It was the general counsel of a law firm. And he had a very strong orientation towards risk management and those types of models. And so, again, notice we're not talking about Python algorithms here. We're talking about risk management. And then if you can turbocharge them with things like those advanced technologies, all the best. But when I think of risk management, I naturally gravitate over to insurance modeling and so forth.
Interesting. And last question that came in, Katherine, maybe I'll start with you. And then Judith, I think that you love your thoughts on this as well. Like, so that when clients, they're looking for sort of these insights, predictive insights. Are we trying any productization of data insights? And examples here. This is paid newsletters, white papers, or Katherine, I'm thinking like you've seen productization of some of these like risk tools that they can actually sort of start to leverage. Have you seen anything or any thoughts on that, Katherine?
I think the market's going to mature over that in the next 5 years. I know it sounds like a long time, but I think for real change to happen, we're probably looking about 5 years out. I will reflect on even where we were as a firm 2017, knocking on the doors of vendors of, hey, can we access APIs so that we can combine it with our internal data? And we got almost every door shut except for the few that we currently have in our pipeline today. And now we see a lot of vendors coming back to us. Why do I talk about that? Well, can you imagine a future state where a firm has an API to share with a client, right? It seems like a natural approach. Or another means to ingest information. There's a lot of ways that we could do that, but API, I think, is identifiable for everyone on the call that, there could be a vast clients where we need to share vast amounts of data with. So what does that look like? And those that have the best and most prepared and most quality data, right, could be the best firm to work with. So I think, to me, there's a lot yet to be done in the next 5 to 10 years. I think that's a way to productize it or monetize it. But right now, I think it's really just about making sure that clients are elevated in line with our expertise, because we both benefit from that. So however that is to be done, whether it's just a value add today, having these conversations, helping them understand. Today with Incubator, it is a legal tech consulting. We work with clients in Team Connect, for example, to help them put EI&D initiatives to work, meaning they're collecting certain data attributes from firms on that. And how do we do that? We're still, to me, in the what I would call the foundation phase. And that is just how do we collect this data? And then we're going to mature into where I love the question on prescriptive analytics, really, from Michael, because that is where I think eventually we're headed towards. I'm not sure it's going to be as prescriptive as it is recommended approaches, just because of the industry we're in. But yeah, I think there's going to be ways to do that. I don't even think we've scratched the surface on what it's going to look like in the future.
Well, that's great. And Judith, the just another sort of lens on that, like as far as like market or data-driven sort of market insights or trends, proactively sort of giving or providing clients with like content that's curated and easily digestible, sort of anything and whether it be paid newsletters or white papers or otherwise. Any thoughts or perspective on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, we've toyed with the idea of certain of the newsletters we already share with clients, productizing and monetizing them. And then we've kind of gone on the side of just keeping them exclusive, but not monetizing them at this point. But there's certainly some data-driven offerings in the pipeline that we might, like legislative intelligence offering, that might be something we would monetize in the future. But I think, I guess having been a former client, a little bit of two minds about it, in the sense that, giving those insights helps our clients get ahead of issues, and then dealing with getting ahead of those issues is really, where we extract our value. And so the key is maybe not giving too much of our insight at the beginning, so that we can sort of get their attention, and then give them the real value add on a billable way. And it's sort of interesting, like I think there's a branding issue that law firms need to look at around this whole area, which is, a client will go to a McKinsey and pay a lot of money for their insights, and a lot of them are data-driven insights, without question. And they'll go to a law firm for the very same kind of insights and say, "Oh, can I have that for free?" So there isn't the same, even though that insight might actually be more valuable.
Yeah.
So I think there is, in line with this, a little bit of rethinking about how we brand ourselves and how we help our clients value that data-driven insight and not expect it for free.
Yeah. And Dennis, you in the comments, you sort of made the note that you spoke to GC yesterday. You indicated that predictive analytics was their number one priority from the C-suite going forward. So I mean, there's a demand, just using that anecdotal example for that as well. So is top of the hour. So I just want to thank Katherine and Judith and Mark for taking the time to provide perspective on this. Really appreciate everybody joining. And I know I'll get in big trouble if I don't sort of mention, just trying to find it here, that there's actually the next webinar is Legal Ops, and that's Wednesday, November 30th at 3 o'clock Central Time. So I encourage you all to sort of sign up for that if it's relevant. This recording will be made available as well. And just a big thanks for everybody taking the time and joining us today.